now who I think who's going to actually take this emerging economy narrative and take it further for us. And I really want to just say 2 words about Mead. You know, I don't think there's really any other person that I know that speaks of the opportunities of the region with really the coherence, vision, and passion that Mead does. His insights they're informed from his lifetime of experiences. He worked in both government and the private sector, and so, you know, getting, I think, both sides of that is really important. And the challenges have not been lost on Mead, but he's kind of one of those who, you know, when some say they only see challenges, others see an opportunity. And you know, it's funny. So every time he talks, even though I can almost do his speech verbatim without him, he gets me all rallied up again. I'm like, that's right, we gotta go. So I thought there could be no other perfect person to kind of talk about this in a much more global context. So, Mead, come on up. Slides bigger?
Okay, we gotta go. Jessica, thank you, and it's fun to be back back with you here. My name is Mead Treadwell, and for those of you who didn't see the bio, it's missing my day job. I'm vice chair of the Alaska to Alberta Railway for Alaska, and chair of KELAC LNG. But I'm here basically today. I'll talk a little bit more about A2A in a later panel. But I'm basically also here today as co-chair of the Polar Initiative at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And let me just talk a little bit about what we've been trying to do at the Wilson Center that relates to what Arctic360 is trying to do. Purely and simply, there's a few navigators in the room. If you don't have a chart, you're not going to get where you're going, and you're going to find some things in the way. There are a few very important First Nations leaders in the room, my neighbors from the Yukon, others from NWT, Labrador, and elsewhere, and Vitas from Greenland and his group. And all of us have talked about what can we do to make the Arctic more ready for investment. And last night, Russell gave us kind of 3 legs of a stool. He said, you know, there are government investments that can go into the Arctic that build roads or build ports or airports. There are company investments that can come into the Arctic that will build a mine or drill an oil well or maybe even set up a store. But what's been lacking in the Arctic is what is called institutional investment. And just to help you think about institutional investment, you know, if you're setting aside money for your pension, or somebody else is setting aside money for your pension, or if you've bought life insurance, or if your government has a savings account, it normally aggregates a large amount of enough money to be able to go out to global investment managers who specialize in different things. Some specialize in stocks, some specialize in bonds, some specialize in infrastructure finance, some specialize in venture capital, some specialize in private equity. And why do these institutions exist? They exist because money around the world wants to be able to move around the world. And the second is because in developing these centers of expertise, you get efficiencies and better returns. And for us in the Arctic to be paying attention to that part of the world where there's huge amounts of money means that we need to get ready. And there are several things that we at the Wilson Center, Arctic360, and others are doing to help the North get ready. And let me talk about it this way. The talk today is Finding $1 Trillion, Opportunities and Challenges in Bringing Investment to the Arctic. And I like to start, Russell had a list last night. He had 5 things on his list. I add defense. So there's 6 things we do in the North, across the North. We help feed the world. In northern Norway, in the Barents region, we've got the richest fishery in the North Atlantic. In Alaska and the Bering Sea region. We have the richest fishery in the North Pacific. We do lots to feed the world other ways too. We help fuel the world, and we've talked about energy. Energy is a huge part of Russia's GDP. It's potentially a huge part of Canada's GDP higher north. It's a very large part of Canada's GDP, as it were, in areas like Alberta, which we'll talk about for its potential effect in adding to the infrastructure plans of the north. We have massive hydroelectric exports from this part of northern Canada to the northeastern United States. We have prospects for HVDC cable export of hydroelectric power from Greenland to North America and from Iceland to Europe. We have tremendous amounts of energy. We help feed the world, we help fuel the world. We also help provision the world with minerals, and you've heard about large iron ore mines. Yvonne talked about that. You've got also the Mary River mine on Baffin Island that is huge. We have the largest lead zinc mine in North America at Red Dog, owned by an indigenous corporation, NANA, and mined by Cominco. We have the largest nickel mine with year-round shipping from Norilsk in Russia. And we have tremendous prospects not only in rare earth minerals, and Vitas talked about that a little bit last night, but in the ingredients for car batteries, electric car batteries, which is growing. There's kind of a nickel, cobalt, graphite, zinc, gold rush going on right now to produce that. So we feed the world, we fuel the world, we provision the world. We also do magnificent things to help protect the world. One of the reasons I firmly believe that this generation will be known, the time that we are alive will be known in human history as having brought more people out of poverty around the world than any time in human history, is because despite our expensive and distracting wars in the Middle East, we have done a huge thing in the last 50 years in bringing development to people who had no safe drinking water, lived in places that had dirt floors, could never even expect to get an education, could never even expect to see their kids doing things that some of the kids in this room are doing today, right? That is something that we all as humans can be proud of. But it's also happened because we've had a general security umbrella. And I remember talking to one of Vitas's colleagues at one point who said, you know, as Greenland attains independence, how much do you think people will pay for the base at Thule? And I said, I don't know. Millions of dollars I'd expect, but the most important thing is that if you own a rock, which is fundamental to protecting the lives of 750 million people in Europe and North America, they ought to answer your phone in Brussels and Washington anytime you need to. And what we do in the North in terms of logistics is magnificent. If you go down to the washrooms downstairs, there's a beautiful poster done in 1945 about the North and the value of the North for security in North America, and it's also fundamental to security in Eurasia and Europe. So we feed the world, fuel the world, provision the world, protect the world. We also connect the world. The largest air cargo hubs for FedEx and UPS outside Memphis and Louisville is Anchorage, Alaska. The tremendous possibilities, the 500-year quest to make the Northwest Passage somewhat economic, or the Northeast Passage, is coming upon us in our time. The absolutely amazing effects of new ground transportation is coming along. And when I talk about new ground transportation, we'll talk about Grace Harbor, we'll talk about the Alberta-Alaska Railway, but be aware that there are right now 3 railways competing to bring northern sea route goods from the Arctic into Europe in Eurasia right now. Building railroads is not just a 19th century thing. It's a 21st century thing. What we do with telecommunications. I get to chair an advisory board for Iridium because our particular polar configuration serves the entire north and top and south part of the world where geosynchronous satellites are not as effective. And we are watching closely the other LEO networks are in cooperation with several of them. And we are watching very closely the development of new fiber networks. There is a huge amount of data need in the Arctic that's amazing, and the Arctic does lots to connect the world. And I should just say we also inspire the world. Russell was a little bit more specific yesterday. He called it tourism. But the fact is that tourism is a major growth engine for the economies of Alaska for sure, Iceland for sure, Finland for sure. Winter tourism there is significant. And it's growing. It is a potential engine of growth for Greenland. It's a potential engine of growth for Northern Canada. And I was meeting with my colleague from Quark Expeditions. I helped establish ecotourism in the Bering Sea area with Russia back after we opened the border in the 1980s. Today at PT Capital, we're proud to say we own a collection of hotels in both Finland and Iceland and would like to expand as well, and actually are competing with others who are expanding across the north. Tourism, because our beauty and because of the richness of our indigenous cultures, certainly inspires the world. So Russell, your list was 5, mine's 6, but the fact is that there's a set of emerging opportunities in the Arctic. Next slide. Which we're looking at. Oil and gas is there. Renewable resources on land and in sea are there. Mining, shipping, tourism, fishing. And when I talked about shipping, I think we should also say land transportation. Growth is driven by global demand for natural resources, tech advances, and retreating sea ice and the opening of sea routes and trade. I'm also going to say it's driven by this. We are still at the age of decolonization in the north. Alaska only became a state in 1959. Nunavut is a new region. Self-governance in Greenland, you just heard about. Iceland became an independent country during World War II. Our nations, our host nations, went to the United Nations in 1945 and said, here's what we're going to do to help provide self-determination to our northern territories and colonies. We've almost finished the job, but not entirely. And one of the reasons why we haven't finished the job is because we haven't done as much as we can to provide economic self-determination along with political self-determination. And one of the best ways to do that is to help bring in this third leg of the stool that Russell talked about yesterday. So here's what we've done. At the Wilson Center, we just made an announcement in late last year. Scott Minerd, the CIO of the $250+ billion Guggenheim Fund, and I and former President of Iceland, President Grimson, announced that we would renew the Arctic infrastructure inventory concept that Guggenheim helped us do at the World Economic Forum a few years ago. And what we looked at a few years ago is we took the best of the viable projects in infrastructure in the north that we could, that the analysts could put together, and we came up with $1 trillion number, which was the most pressing needs in the region for things like clean water and energy and other projects. We did this in 2016, 4 years ago, and we got to $1 trillion number. Next slide. We mapped that, and you can see that there were major projects that we saw across the north, as well as shipping opportunities. Next slide. We also worked at an earlier conference with Arctic360. We said, let's look at North America. And Vitas, I apologize for not having the Greenland projects on there, but we're going to get them there because all this discussion about new North American free trade agreements and so forth, I'd get in on that if I were you. You can claim status as both European and North American, and we'd love to have you in. But I mean, the point is we need to think of this area as an investment venue, and there are quite a few major projects seeking infrastructure investment in the North. And so by doing this at Wilson, what we're trying to do for the Arctic world is to develop an infrastructure inventory to help make the case to institutional investors. Owners, the people who are running your pension funds, if you're a public employee here in Ontario, they have an office to finance infrastructure in Australia. Bully, that's great, okay? Let's make the case that the Arctic is a place where you should be supporting institutional investment as well. And what I'm hoping that the Arctic report card can do with 360 is really two things. One is any banker will tell you, yeah, if you're going to buy this house, how much is this house? How many $100,000 of this house? Is the house worth what you're paying for it? That's why they send you out for an appraisal, right? The other thing they'll do is they'll look at your paychecks and say, what kind of income do you have? Do you have the cash flow to cover the debt? At the Wilson Center, we're going to look at the infrastructure inventory, but we're not really looking at the cash flow to cover the debt. And I've urged Jessica in the concept of the Arctic report card is that we take a look at the GDP of the various Arctic regions, understand what the impacts are on the GDP, where are the flows of money, and that is going to help us convince institutional capital that ultimately we're a good risk. The second issue that I hope the Arctic report card does, and I'm going to say to those of you who work with financial institutions in the room, we need to kind of identify who's interested. You can get a small room like this and get most of the major institutional investors in the Arctic. And we need more. I thought it was very interesting at a conference that, at the Arctic Circle conference in October, Russell spoke about infrastructure finance, and Jim Pass of Guggenheim said, you know, when we started this, he kind of intimated he wasn't sure if it was just Scott's hobby. But he said, we get now over 100 proposals a year of somewhat viable projects to invest in at Guggenheim in the North because of what we've done with this collection of think tanks. So that's what we're up to. Let me go to the next slide. Another thing we have to think about in the Arctic is risk management. Capital hates risk. It likes to do better, but it looks at it, and there's really three kinds of risks that I wanted to talk about today. There's political risk, environmental risk, and market risk. Go to the next slide. The outside perceptions of the Arctic, what Jessica just talked about, the snow globe thing, to me is a travesty. Why is it a travesty? Because if you're going to put your pension money or your life insurance money in an institution, you want that institution to do due diligence before they make decisions. I can tell you with certainty and authority that everybody who has redlined us in the Arctic has done no due diligence at the ground level to understand what we who live in the Arctic have been doing to make sure that our investment opportunities are sustainable. They failed. They failed in the most basic thing that you expect financial institutions not to fail in. They didn't do their homework. You cannot sit in London and hope that somebody in a polar bear suit's not going to show up at your annual meeting and say, I'm going to write off the Arctic and be done. You need to come to us and say, how are you dealing with the challenge of making a mine happen and putting your people to work and making sure the mine is not polluting? You need to come talk to us about oil and gas and say, what are you doing? I can tell you in Alaska, I am incredibly proud of what we've done in wind diesel technology to back down the use of diesel in the Arctic, what we're struggling with now to try to get LNG bunkering to make clean ship fuel happen in the Arctic. And I am not going to have anybody tell me that we're unsustainable for you to come look at us. And the answer that governments have to give to these people, because you're big investors, the answer that the community of investors in these institutional funds has to do is do your homework. We want to see the homework. There hasn't been any homework. And it's disgusting. All right? It is the same racist redlining that we passed laws against in the United States when certain banks said we're not going to invest in certain ghettos. Okay? Do not stand for it. We have developed at the World Economic Forum, and we have adopted at the Arctic Economic Council an investment protocol that basically is a code of conduct for responsible economic development in the Arctic. Was that in the Barclays report? No. Yet we have companies, and I would urge your company to sign up for that as something important. It says we're going to work with First Nations. It has a pragmatic set of goals. Let's go to the next slide. The 6 principles are to build resilient societies through economic development. Do they want the 4 million of us who live in the North to go away? Respect and include local communities and indigenous peoples. They didn't do that. Pursue measures to protect the environment of the Arctic. Practice responsible and transparent business methods. Consult and integrate science and traditional ecological knowledge. In 2 projects that I'm working on, the A2A Rail and the KELAC project, I'll tell you that's one of the most fascinating parts of my job right now, is seeing traditional ecological knowledge come in with our scientists in the permitting process. And finally, strengthen Pan-Arctic collaboration and sharing of best practices. And there's much to be done. Let's go to the next slide. As we try to make this an area that is suitable for investment, and as we do our homework, there's a couple of thoughts that I just want to leave us with. There's going to be a panel on indigenous financing later today, and I believe it's very important. Some people have said, well, we don't necessarily like the Alaska model. Let me tell you what the Alaska model did. In 1971, indigenous groups in Alaska were organized into 13 regional corporations and approximately 200 village corporations. The state of Alaska and the federal government put $1 billion venture capital in 1981, which is a lot of money, and said, this is one step toward reconciliation. We later recognized tribal governments, and so political power grew probably after economic power grew. But the turnover of those Alaska Native corporations today is over $12 billion. It's a quarter of our economy in the North. It's huge. And the capability of those corporations to invest in and to bring investment and have local ownership is significant. And as I work with A2A, you'll hear from Mr. Dockstader today. I work with him and his father. His father's co-chair for Canada, vice chair for Canada at A2A, is we are working to see that capability developed across Canada and better developed with our village corporations in Alaska. One opportunity that we're watching very closely is the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. Launched with $1 billion commitment from first of its kind Crown Corporation in Canada, and is structured to facilitate investment by Indigenous groups in natural resource and infrastructure projects. And what's happening is we've gone from saying, we're going to come into the North and give you job training programs. We're going to come into the North and hire you to be, help us operate the base or the security guards or that sort of thing. And now we're saying, together, let's co-invest in the North and make sure that we've got long-term ownership and bring that home. And the exact same things that we have to do to go for global investment capital, we have to do in working with local and indigenous organizations. Next slide. I'm going to finish by saying in later panels we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's also very important that we as governments in the North recognize the value of long-term continuing cash flow. Last night I mentioned that Greenland, which, you know, 2 or 3 of the biggest financings going on right now are expanding their airports. As I fly across the Arctic, I told Vitas I've been in Greenland airspace more recently than I've been in Alaska airspace. And the fact is that we don't pay overflight fees in Greenland. Most of them go to Iceland and Canada. And yet, overflight fees can be significant. I'm not sure what the Atlantic number is, Russia collects over $500 million a year on overflight fees, and I paid some of those through my ticket price also this week. The fact is that that's a recurring source of cash flow that helps infrastructure below. The overflight fees from over Alaska pay for our basic air service to remote communities. That's where the subsidy comes from. Other continuing sources of cash flow are very, very important. And one that we have a measure pending in the US Senate and the US House right now, it's actually two measures we'll talk about, is to try to set up a recurring source of cash flow to help pay for the icebreakers in the Arctic. It's not to make our Coast Guards mercenary. It is to make a source of cash flow so that I can say with a straight face, if China's going to ship goods to France through the Arctic, they ought to be helping to pay for the marine safety that's necessary. And so we're trying to come up with cash flow mechanisms there. So whether it's aviation, whether it's toll roads like we've done with the Red Dog mine, whether it's shipping, think about that as a very, very important thing. And when people talk about stability in government policy, the on-again, off-again thing that we've had with offshore oil drilling has not been conducive to corporate investment and has been a discouragement to institutional investment. Yeah, I just finished right here. We'll talk about the Alaska to Alberta Railway a little bit later, but this is also a significant piece of infrastructure as part of Canada's Northern Corridor, as part of Alaska's connection to the lower 48 that we believe is going to be a significant driver for economic development in the North. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
We can open up to a few questions if anyone has any quickly. And also, I just want to, to piggyback up on with Mead. So, Madeline and I have been working a lot on putting the foundations together for this Arctic Economic Report Card, and we've been collaborating with University of Victoria on this. And so, but the thing is, at the end of the day, we need sponsorship money. We need money. Someone's going to have to step up for us to be able to do this because it's not going to get done on its own. And so the Wilson Center has been very fortunate to have Guggenheim help with their share. And I do hope also, and this is supposed to be a yearly report card. That's the intention and our plan. And at the same time, I hope it can also, contribute to some of the infrastructure inventory pieces that you are doing. I hope we have something to say here in Canada about what's going on in our own north, and we can contribute also to the work that they're doing. So, but none of this gets done, without the will and the investment by, either private sector and federal government to help carry this work out. So, but I would love to open it up for a minute for Mead if anyone has any questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
See the movement of many institutional funds focusing on ESGs as a barrier or an opportunity for New York? Like $150 billion was Scotia, BMO, they've all moved a ton of money into only ESG related projects.
I actually used to be on the board of one of the leading ESG analytical firms in the United States, and I feel that we have a good ESG record. I think compared to other energy and mineral production around the world and transportation, that what we are trying to do and working hard to protect the environment while we develop the economy is a good story. And one of the things that I think we need to do is talk to those ESG analysts who are supposed to be doing the homework to say, why haven't you talked to us? I'll just give you one example. We're not ready to announce it, but I'm trying to put 4 million tons of LNG on the market while Russia is sailing right past us with what will be about 45 million tons. Okay? Both of us are replacing coal in Chinese power plants. That's, I think, good for the world. Both of us are looking at, or we're looking at decarbonization technologies that might make, natural gas more into hydrogen. That would be benign, and the byproduct is graphite you can use in electric car batteries. There are things that we have to do in this transition that are a lot better than this. So I guess the challenge I would say is to the ESG, that's environment and social governance, environment, social, and governance. It's you know, it used to be if you were the New York Firefighters Union after 9/11, you did not want to invest in companies harboring terrorism. We served those pension funds to tell them which companies were on the good side and which ones were not. You want to, you know, you've mentioned tobacco. You know, we'll help you define what's in tobacco and so forth. The energy industry is not just a smokestack industry, and that's where some of the ESG people have gotten it wrong. And I think there's more we can do better. And I think I mean, for example, we almost, at PT Capital, we came very close to putting together one of these ESG funds on fisheries because I believe our fisheries are the most sustainable in the North. And that was also going to look at Greenland's fisheries, by the way.
One quick question and one quick answer. Is that okay?
Yep. Yep.
Well, sort of actually the same question to both of you. As a northerner and particular Arctic people, and I've lived there now 47 years, raising a family there, how do we get the investment for ourselves against the investment that's going into all of these eco companies that are out there that save the world from development? And it's in the billions.
Sure.
We're trying to get one mine, one road, one power project. How do you do that? How do you get past that?
Well, I think what we're doing, and this can be a broader discussion, but one, first off, work very hard on the economics of the projects to have good projects, okay? That helps you convince governments, it helps you convince companies, and it can help you convince institutions. Second, what we're trying to do with the data here and so forth is to make the Arctic seem more friendly and accessible to institutions. And when you do that, I think it's also important to understand that there's different kinds of institutions. Russell talked last night about how infrastructure finance, which is kind of a, maybe I'm right or wrong in calling it structured equity, Russell, but there, you know, it's a structured return that is somewhat a safer and better return these days than the bond market has become. And so understanding who's raising that kind of money, who's investing that kind of money, and talking to them. So the answer is we are always in a global fight for capital. There's 4 million of us live in the Arctic. We don't have enough money in our mattresses to do what we can do for the world. We have to understand that going for the flow of capital is going to be essential to our success. And it's a much longer answer, but the fact is we can win, and we have won. And you know, this snow globe thing that we're up against, don't let it kill us. That's all I have
And
to
just
say.
to piggyback off on that, because one of the things that we are working on to include in the report card is a whole section on EHS, and I've been having some conversations with someone who's kind of heading up, doing a lot of EHS and ESG work for MSCI, and trying to figure out what indicators we need to look at to have actually to be able to create a different narrative on kind of how these factors are coming into the projects and stuff, and to maybe offset some of the what you were talking about, the due diligence that hasn't been done, and actually provide some correct and proper real due diligence on that. And so thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I think we're gonna. Yeah. One question? No? Yes. Yes. Yes, please. Do you want to hear? Take that microphone.
I totally agree on the investment opportunities that you listed. For over 12 years, Greenland has had fiber optic connection that we have paid and invested heavily. And we are able to get the fiber optic communication for over a decade. We have offered our neighbors in Nunavut to have their own fiber optic connection through Greenland. Now they have been contemplating on establishing a connection from Alberta or from Edmonton, I guess, which would require a considerable investment. If they have chosen the already existing connection from Greenland, you could spend between a fifth or a sixth of the investment that is going to be conducted in this operation So sometimes you need to make smart decisions. And I think it's important that we emphasize the possibilities that we each can offer and perhaps highlight what already exists in order to make smart decisions and to save funds and means that you can spend for other purposes. So for instance, to develop the infrastructure. So it's just an emphasis on why it's so important to highlight what the options are, not only in your vicinity, but amongst the neighboring countries.
Vitas, thank you. On telecom, here's an interesting footnote. Canada is still not part of North American missile defense. Okay? You're shaking your head no. I'm correct. Because Canada did not join missile defense, we did not put the fiber optic between our radar in Alaska and the Thule radar in Greenland. And had we done that, we would have wired much, much more of the Canadian North. And that was kind of a lost opportunity because of separate politics. Our U.S. Department of Defense made a bit of a mistake on shipping to Thule last year and tried to do it with an American carrier, not recognizing that the shipping to Thule was also reducing the cost of bringing goods to the north in Greenland. And ultimately, it became a subcontract back to the Greenland Shipping Company. But if we don't look at and understand our infrastructure needs together, we're going to lose more opportunities like this, and we shouldn't. So, Vitas, thanks for making that point.